Good morning, everyone. Kalimera. A few years ago, I was visiting my kumbaro in Utah during the summer. And while in Utah, we thought it would be fun to go inner tubing down a lazy river called the Weber River. The locals called it floating the Weber. So we drove out to the river with our inner tubes and prepared on the bank of the river to enter. Now on this riverbank was a large warning sign. The sign said, "Warning, if river is moving quickly, do not enter." Now my kumbaro and I don't know much about rivers. So we looked at this river and it didn't seem to be moving too fast to us. So we tossed in our inner tubes and hopped on in and began floating down this, what we thought was a lazy river. However, this river was not a lazy river. After only a few moments on the river, we realized that it was quite rapid. In fact, the river was moving very quickly and the water itself was freezing cold. So what we thought would be an enjoyable day floating the river turned into one of the worst afternoons of my entire life. Imagine for 2 hours being dashed on rocks, trying to hang on to an inner tube for dear life. Whenever I wasn't being slammed from rock to rock, I was shivering so much from the freezing water that my teeth were chattering. Then finally, after about 2 hours of this torture, we found a bank and were able to escape this deadly freezing river. We were both left with bumps, bruises, and some minor injuries that lasted for a few weeks, actually. We suffered all of this pain, all of this agony, simply because we did not take the warning sign seriously. The warning sign was placed right at the beginning of the river to prevent exactly this kind of experience, or possibly even worse. And even though we read it, we jumped into the river anyway. And oh, how we regretted it. Today, we are all at the beginning of something as well. Though it is not a journey down a river, it is indeed a journey that we are all about to embark on. Today is the first day of the Triodion period, which is the 3-week period of preparation that precedes Holy Lent which is coming up. And just like there was a warning sign at the beginning of the Weber River, Jesus Christ gives us all a warning sign today as we begin this journey to and through Holy Lent. Today, Christ warns us of the one fatal flaw, the one sin that can cause the most damage. And it can make for a more miserable journey, not only through Lent, but through life as well. He warns us of the one thing he wants us to stay away from, the one thing he does not want us to get pulled into. Today, Christ warns us of the danger of pride, egoism, egoismo. You may know it as self-centeredness, selfishness, or narcissism. Egoism is defined as an ethical theory that treats self-interest as the foundation of morality. Imagine every action or behavior or decision someone makes being motivated by their own self-interest. This is the way someone with egoism functions. In fact, it's easy to remember how self-absorbed someone like this is, because we see that the Greek word egoismo itself contains the word ego, which means I. In today's gospel passage, Christ tells us a parable of 2 men who went to the temple to pray. The first man, the Pharisee, embodies this egoismo, this pride, when he prays the prayer, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. I do this. I do that." He even lists all the different kinds of people that he thinks he is better than. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the lowly tax collector who stays all the way in the back of the temple. And it says he would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And Jesus then completes his warning sign at the conclusion of the gospel passage when he says, "I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted." What an interesting time for Christ to give us this warning at the beginning of Triodion, just before Great Lent. It is during Lent that we all strive to be better, that we all try to fast, to focus more on God. It is a time when we set out to actively do good. But all the good we do can be undone completely by this fatal flaw of pride and egoism. If we set out even with good intentions, but are caught up in our own egos and arrogance, in the end, we will end up crashing and getting hopelessly tossed around, even worse than I was by the Weber River. It is amazing that this parable comes to us from more than 2,000 years ago. The issue of pride and egoism is still raging today, perhaps even worse than ever. Of all the sins, it is perhaps the easiest one to slip into. It is the easiest one to succumb to, and it can destroy us if we let it. I was speaking with an older Greek woman the other day, and she was telling me how she listens to a priest in Greece who preaches on contemporary issues. And apparently the divorce rate in Greece, and probably everywhere else, among young couples is sky high these days. And this woman said to me, "Do you know what the priest said the main cause of all these divorces is?" I didn't know. I thought maybe communication, something like that. And she told me, egoism. So we see that egoism not only ruins us, but it ruins relationships. It ruins marriages and friendships. It hurts other people. Christ knew this more than 2,000 years ago. So to protect us from ourselves, he warns us that everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. So we see that this issue is not a new issue. It is an issue that was prevalent during Christ's time. So much so that it is the very first thing he warns us about today on the first day of Triodion. So unlike me at the Weber River, let us pay attention to the warning sign from Christ today. Let us not just see his warning, but let us heed it as well. Let us steer away from a life of pride, arrogance, self-absorption, and egoism. Let us instead think of ourselves more humbly. Let us live humble lives. Let us think humble thoughts. Let us be like the publican who acknowledged his own sins, who did not place himself above other people, who simply sought the mercy of God and found himself exalted. Amen.